Welcome back to Hot Flashes and Cold Topics, everybody. Today, we're really excited to talk to psychotherapist Charlotte Fox Weber, and she's the author of a book titled Tell Me What You Want. And we're really excited to talk about all of the little parts that she breaks down in the book. So, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. So lovely to be here.
Well, thank you. We're happy to have you. And, just reading your book, you really, delved in. I like how you divided the chapters in the book. And I like that you added a glossary in the back to explain some things. I really like that.
And
I
you
had
talk
I
about
had fun writing that
Yeah.
part.
you talk about, just so the listeners know, you talk about 12 deepest desires. So like the book is based on 12 deep desires, which helps outline the book, because I think in the title it talks about a therapist and her clients explore our deepest 12 desires. So I just want to make sure the listeners knew that.
Right. It's, when I was looking at reading the book and reading about the different desires in there, and every one of the points that you had, there's good and there's things that maybe aren't so good about each of those. So, I wanted to just talk, first of all, about desire. You know, that's a great thing, but
Is it a dirty word,
It's-
Bridget? Are you
It's the
saying
most complicated source of conflict for human beings in every culture, at every point in history, at every age. It's fascinating that there's so many philosophers who want to resolve the issue as well, like either pro desire or eliminate desire, when actually it's never going to be resolved. But I don't think it needs to be.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, and I think this goes along with every one of the points too, that, gosh, I'm trying to think of how to word this, like with desire, the good points that you want with something. Well, it's what society tells us. And you bring that up too, what you should and what you shouldn't want, and what you feel like you should want. Even though it's maybe not what you want.
And yeah, and it's required for civilization. I mean, if we went around just acting on every desire, we would be savage.
Yes, yes. And the
But I
people we
think
would hurt in the process.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and so I think manners keeps us in check to a degree, but then it goes too far, and and we stop resonating with our own inner experience in a certain way.
what I thought was really interesting was that the book outlines 12 deepest desires that you talk about. And at the end of, well, you kind of weave in your own stories of clients, but obviously you protect their names and facts, so that I think it's more relatable because you can kind of see yourself in some of your patients. But I also thought that with the 12 desires, depending on the age that I would have read that book, the emphasis on certain ones would be different. Like I couldn't
Yes.
say to you what's the most important desire because it depends on the age. Did you find that when you were writing it?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to be able to revise your priorities and change your mind about what matters most. And it's somehow this big shock that what you really cared about at 21 is not what you really care about when you're 35. And I mean, in marriages and relationships of all sorts, it comes as this massive shock and kind of sense of betrayal that priorities shift.
Yes, they absolutely do. Careers shift. I'm not, neither Colleen nor I are doing what we did when we graduated from
Thank
college.
goodness.
Yes. We, and did I think that I was going to do that? I didn't know what a podcast was when I was 25.
I don't
Now,
think there were podcasts.
I don't think
Bridget,
there were there were podcasts when we were 25.
not to
But
age us, but
I know. But it is so
But you
interesting.
allowed yourself to be surprised.
Yes. And that's the thing, the fear that goes along with you have a desire, but the fear of the unknown. That is always something, just the fear of the unknown. And then there's the
Completely.
outside voices that tell you you can't do it. Or the people, not only the voice, not voices in your head. It could be that too, but it's naysayers.
But it's the stories you've told yourself, and what education teaches us, and religion and culture. And I think a lot of us feel deeply ashamed and kind of embarrassed by desire, not just behavior, but even having the thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, growing up
So,
like I did, you feel like I'd probably have to go to confession for all of the things that I've talked about on this podcast. So,
Right.
but
But
now I'm
isn't
over
it
that.
liberating when you can recognize your own inner world without worrying that that makes you a psychopath?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
I think for some of our listeners too, desire at 40 plus, 50 plus, 60 plus is something we're not comfortable with. Not be, and I'm not talking sexual desire, but the desire to do the work for ourselves. We have put
Mm,
everyone else first in our lives, whether it be a spouse, children, our career. Now all of a sudden we're hitting an age where we're allowed to put ourselves first. And we're kind of saying, okay, we hear this a lot from listeners. I don't know what my desire is because my
mm,
desire isn't what it was when I was 20. And that was the last time I thought about myself.
right.
So, how do you do the work for someone who's saying, I, I'm okay now. I think I want to put myself first, but I don't know what my desires are.
So I hear that a lot, and I think there's a lot of pressure to kind of have certainty and clarity, like to figure it out and be goal oriented, when actually it's really about ordinary observations of your own lived experience and curiosity and having a range of sources. So I think diversifying meaning is incredibly helpful. Even if your desires aren't the same from when you were 25, you can go back to that time period and see what's there. And it's a kind of constant work in progress. So it's not as if you have to kind of do a mind map where you end up having 100% clarity that you want one thing and one thing only. I mean, we expect that kind of resolution, and I think it's completely understandable to have conflicts as well, just internally, to kind of want one thing that's really clashing with something else you want. So expecting that inner tension, I think, allows for a wider approach.
Mhm. To that, to that area, to your different parts of your book, one of your chapters is on understanding and trying
Mm.
to find just to be understood is a big thing. And there, can you
Yes,
talk a little bit about understanding?
I think we get very attached to the stories that we know, because even if we want to change, even when we spend a lot of money going to therapy, ostensibly to change, it's one step forward, one step back, because change is really daunting, and we revert to familiarity, even if it's just the familiarity of low self-esteem or self-loathing. Like, that's my old frenemy in my head, and it's what I know best and feels truest. And I think that resistance is also something that is completely ordinary and universal. And I mean, psychotherapists are really hypocritical on this one, because we think we've kind of done the work on ourselves, but we're all resistant and kind of playing games internally as well.
Mhm.
So I think just being curious to let go of some definition, like let go of the idea that you are just a nice girl who makes people happy or whatever it is. I'm just kind of opening it up for something new.
Mhm. And yeah, and I love, you had in there the understanding when people will come to you sometimes, it's almost as if they want to feel like that somebody's in agreement with them. And
Yes.
yes,
Just
and
they come to get confirmation that they are right.
yes, yeah, and it's so interesting just because I'll see that sometimes in things like when I've talked to people, and then when they don't, when they're not agreed with, "Why don't you
It's
agree
an
with me?"
affront.
Right.
Yes,
It's a
I
yeah,
know. I mean,
personal attack.
yeah,
yes,
that's what they
and
feel. Mhm,
I was really aware of that over Christmas with my family, where I everyone was just kind of wanting to win points conversationally. It wasn't about just exploring and discovering. It was just knowing whatever the answer was. And it's very uncreative to get into that mode. And I think it happens to most of us, but it's something to kind of be aware of so that it doesn't stagnate, because it just it gets very careful.
yes, yes, it does, and that's tedious and tiring, and then if
Mm,
sometimes you get caught up in it when you're around people that's that that's the way the conversation's going or the situation, then
Yes.
you become part of it as well. And just trying to maybe step back and have the awareness. I'm going into this again, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I found myself just pontificating recently, and I was bothered that I was telling the same story in the same way and kind of showing off some fact I knew. And I then just embraced a beginner's mindset and was a fool. And it was much more interesting what kind of came next. But it just means letting go a bit and
Yeah.
kind of embarrassing yourself in those small ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Also with your book, and again, it's 12 deepest desires. You talk about power, attention, freedom, and interpreting those desires at this stage are very different. Like to win, that's one of your desires. And I think
Mm,
the definition of winning is so variable and personal to each person. And power,
mm.
I like how you kind of went into power isn't having power over something, it's empowering yourself. Can you talk about those two things?
Yes, I mean, I don't like that women are only allowed to want empowerment, not power. I think I've just said that grammatically incorrectly, but forgive me. I I feel like it's more ladylike to say empowerment. Like it's kind of dignified and good for her that she wants to be empowered because it's modest and kind of less imposing on other people. And actually, women also want the other kind of power and not always for the right reasons, not always in the nicest ways. So I really like getting to the dark, gritty side of things and not just keeping it kind of lovely. But I think, again, that doesn't mean that you have to go and act on your aggressive fantasies of being a kind of dictator. But understanding that you have that fantasy opens up so much. I think we have agency when we are onto ourselves in those ways. So it's a breakthrough to realize that you want to be a dictator
It is.
because
And
Bridget, do you
it's
want to
like
be
your
a
mind.
dictator?
no, I don't want to be a dictator.
Oh, you have moments. You
But you,
must have
yes,
moments.
absolutely, absolutely have moments. But it was, I, you know, in that chapter that was so interesting because it's so true, you know, and I think just reading it in a book and you see this and you think, oh my gosh, you are right. Like, yeah, empowerment is so great. And, you know, that's great. But all of these, all of your chapters, it seems like if a man has that, it's like a quality. And if a woman
Yeah,
has that, it's some kind
it's a
of
bit
damage.
unsightly.
Yes, yes,
She's a bit much already. Like a woman who wants freedom and power. I mean, those are not in the traditional definition of a good woman.
right, right. Hmm.
I find that when we've been starving ourselves and like emotionally and abandoning our sense of self, that's when fantasies get really extreme because it's almost as if we're coming up with theater to kind of offer hyperbolic versions of something. And if you feel really trapped in your life, you might fantasize about kind of running wild in total freedom. And the extreme fantasies are really interesting to think about because it's it's always that kind of paradox where again it doesn't mean you have to abandon your family and run off and be in the jungle and just have total freedom. I don't think anyone is entirely free, but we've kind of shut down conversation and stopped ourselves from being realistic about desire to such a degree that we end up falling for these very idealized versions of what's possible. So there's a kind of belief in some absolute fulfillment. And I think it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I yes, your chapter on freedom, was it that where you were I don't know if you or you talked to someone who was held as like a prisoner for 20 years and when he got out the freedom to turn right and left.
Oh,
And
yes.
yes,
That
yeah,
was an amazing conversation.
yeah.
I loved yeah. Oh, you're very kind to remember that
Oh,
detail.
but I it just, you know, when you read certain things and it kind of, you have a connection with it with something personal. And I was a teacher. I was an
Mm.
elementary school teacher for 17 years, on and off 17 years. And I quit when, before I needed to quit, I quit. And it was kind of a combination. My mother was very old and dying, and and my children were leaving for college, and I wanted to spend more time with them. And when I quit, that like day after I cleaned out my classroom and I drove home and I didn't look in the rearview mirror. And I remember
Mm.
that summer, I told my friend that was still teaching, I said, I felt like I've been let out of prison or something. And
Wow.
it was, I mean, yeah, and
How
so go be a
amazing.
teacher. No, but I think it was constraints that I felt within that job. I loved the
Mm.
children. I really did. But there were certain things that I felt like I couldn't be 100, and not that I need to be extremely 100% myself, but I could not have said the words that I say on this podcast and still hold that teaching job. If I say
Right.
things that we've said on episodes, and especially now just saying that, they would have fired me. But
You seem liberated. I mean,
yeah, but I couldn't,
what a
I
relief.
I could have never said the things we talk about for sexual health. Oh, I would have been fired.
Mm.
So there's something about that type of freedom, but I still had to, I had to be there for my children. I wanted to be there for my husband. I was there for my mother. And,
Mm.
so I kind of felt a real connection, even though I was not in
I was gonna
prison
say that
20
was you
years.
were not in
That's,
prison.
I was taking a
Oh, but
leap
I
there.
mean, I
Yeah.
yeah, I related to him. I always relate to prisoners in in some extreme way,
Yeah.
but because it's a literal enactment of what we do feel in so many ways. But I mean, holding on to the bars of a cage a lot of the time, even if it's all nice and glitzy, I think most of us feel trapped at different moments.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but yes, I mean, we also want to do the right thing and follow through and not just go with impulse.
In incorporating the stories into the 12 desires, it seemed like several of the stories, the fantasies or the desires, really were based on when they were younger, a foundational
Mm.
problem that people don't want to look at.
Mm.
And how do you crack that code? How do you get someone to really look at? Because a lot of people say, oh, the past is the past. I don't want to delve into it. How do
Mm.
you get somebody to really kind of find that point where they need to reflect and be able to kind of have closure?
I think that therapy is often what falls out of your pockets when you're in the session, and not just when it's in person, but online as well. That it's a really illuminating process in ways that are kind of unanticipated. So, what brings someone to therapy is not necessarily what that person then discovers. And I think when you allow your mind to wander and you can go to awkward discussions and speak in a way that is it's very strange in a certain way to kind of go to the here and now and to say how you feel talking to the therapist and going both ways and just kind of shedding light on. I think it's the here and now aspect that is unlike most dynamics anywhere else. It just ends up confronting you with something. So I think that we don't need to look at desire so head on that it kind of resolves itself in a totally clear way, but it's kind of an ongoing process of discovery. So in a way, I think that once you're aware that it matters and that being expansive and open to life is an important thing, it's amazing how people just kind of come across something.
Well,
There's never a moment, really, there's never a moment where you don't desire something as well. Like, even if you lose desire for one area of your life or you feel torpid and underwater and can't kind of describe your desire, like it is part of being alive. So it's also just a life force.
it
But
is, and it's safe. If you're in that therapy office, you're in a safe space to explore each
yes,
time. Hmm.
and to kind of be called out in a certain way. It's safe enough to then take risks hopefully. And I mean, I loved it when someone in therapy recently admitted that she'd been looking at her phone and kind of not paying attention to a big part of our session and the previous week. And she tattled on herself. And it opened up this incredible conversation about the ways she kind of pretends and wants to be liked, but then rebels. And she was running away from herself as well. But it's catching those lies and those masks that can just be, it can be so fascinating.
You mentioned ignoring desires come at a cost. What did you mean by that?
I think that we narrow ourselves and it becomes a kind of half-life if you banish whatever seems inappropriate or wrong or taboo. Like the dark stuff is actually creative and intriguing. And again, it doesn't mean you have to just take it all and act on it, but there's something there that's spontaneous and individual and personal. And there can be this incredible discovery of kind of self-neglect. I think most of us go through that at different times in life, but this kind of realization that you've just been, when I say you, I obviously don't mean you personally, but that you've been obeying and conforming and kind of going into some sleepwalking mode where you walk in the same way, the same place, and you have the same conversations, and it just gets so kind of stifling and uncreative. So I think that we end up missing out on actually what matters most to us if we're not thinking about desire.
Yeah. And
I
you know,
don't I don't see what could matter more in a way. Like what could give you a more vital sense of yourself and thinking about these issues.
and you know, you talk a lot about people pleasing in there as
Mm,
well. And that is something, especially women our age. Oh my
Oh,
goodness. We've
yes.
spent so much time people pleasing that, like Colleen, you said earlier, they don't really know what they desire. But
Right.
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Yes. And we want to just be wanted and in different ways. And then when we're ignored, it's horrific as well. I mean, one of the horrors is also discovering that if you don't ask yourself what really matters and what you want, then you probably won't be asked and it won't be dealt with. Like there's very rarely a trophy for sacrificing yourself and overlooking your needs. It's
yes,
not as if there's a kind of great reward for this self-neglect.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
think we almost think there will be, like if we're good, if we are obedient, then we will get a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah. I
And
said
then
it.
and then we're
Yeah.
bitter and outraged when that really doesn't happen.
Right. I finally have come to the conclusion I never want the word saint to ever be said before my name.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
It's like
And
I'm good with that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably a bit perverse about this, but back to your question about how desires emerge, it's often through opposites. So when people start saying how much they adore their husband or how they really do feel grateful, it's not that I don't think that they're lying. I mean, it sounds now I sound offensive. See how it works? But when it's kind of telling yourself off, like for how you should be operating and thinking and feeling, I, there's another side to it. So a part of you also hates your husband, and that's a way in. It's often through the opposite door, and complaints and irritations are another one that are kind of smoke screens for some lurking desire, like being really annoyed and frustrated all the time is always it's always concealing a bigger want. But I think a lot of us have an easier time complaining and being obstructed and blocked than actually pursuing something that would be exciting.
Right. You know, you use so many, you know, like you did change the names and the stories, but the one in the book, Sing, is the
Mm.
woman, and I loved the spelling and how it was how you pronounce the singing like la 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 was her name. And, I really felt for her because of what she in this story, you can describe, I'll have you describe a little bit of it and but in the story, how her in-laws and what her husband felt she should
Mm,
be doing. So if you want to
mhm.
share just a little bit about seeing and just a tiny bit about her
I mean,
situation.
I don't know if you guys are pro Megan or Kate, or if you're pro everyone, or maybe
Uh,
undiscussable.
yeah,
Oh no, we're just, I say live and let live, whoever
that
wins.
it
So
is.
you're pro Megan
Well,
then.
I don't
I think
dislike
so
either of them.
too.
I
Yeah,
don't,
I just,
I get it. I feel like,
I see
you know,
both their sides.
if you're not in that situation, then I'm like, I don't know what it's like. I'm not there.
Yes,
It's,
yes,
yeah.
agreed.
Yeah.
I think so. Singh is a woman who is used to being a kind of outsider in some ways, wanting to be agreeable, wanting to be cooperative, with secret fantasies of glory. And there's a kind of covert ego, which again, like we're so shamed for having ego and told not to have ego, and to kind of do away with thinking too highly of ourselves at the same time that we're supposedly supposed to value ourselves and have good self-esteem and confidence. And I think Singh is one of many. I've certainly done this. She works for someone who's an egomaniac and kind of smuggles in something that she isn't dealing with in herself by serving a very ambitious, successful man. And
Yeah.
I mean, have you guys ever found yourselves in those situations? I certainly have
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
again and
Oh
again.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
Oh
like
yes.
I'm not actually the humble servant that I think I am in those situations, because there's something about our own secret grand fantasies where we think again that if we're really good, we'll somehow get to the glory, and then it doesn't work out that way.
Mhm.
So thing thing is kind of ostracized for actually being very driven. And her name is mispronounced throughout. And I think actually the name thing happens all the time, where it's like we actually give away our names, and the people pleasing is that extreme that it's sort of whatever you want me to be, I will be. And then it doesn't actually feel real.
You
Yes.
also
Yeah.
mention, and I think this happens a lot to women in our demographic, that identity crises. And
Mm.
you're like, you're having an identity crisis, but you say that's not necessarily a bad thing because it opens up
It's a great
possibilities.
thing. It is a great thing. I mean, having a complete breakdown can be excruciating and unsafe, but it's a really ordinary part of development throughout life to have identity changes. And I think the problem is when we stagnate and kind of go into sheeple people mode and don't face the identity crisis. Any change in your life, you're gonna have a kind of crack in what it means to be you. So when you left your school and you were driving home, like I mean, your sense of self had already changed dramatically in that moment. I don't know if you've had that feeling of kind of describing yourself in a different way, but
Mhm.
it can be really disorienting, and yet it's completely essential for making space for something new. So I
Yeah.
think we should lean into it, and it's where the light comes in.
Yeah.
It's where we make new connections and fall apart and
Yeah,
have
and it can be
possibilities.
scary, but it's actually, it turns out to be fine. So, that's kind of embracing that. And I kind of prepared myself. It's going to be weird. The weirdest thing was when school started up the next year. And I what that
Yes.
first day of school when I didn't go to school and
Mm.
everybody was going to school. And it's so funny because when I'd go out during the day, I'd be like, I'm really not allowed to be here. Like when I would go
Yeah.
to a store, I honestly felt like
You were
I,
playing hooky.
yeah, like I'm
You
not
were going to
supposed to
get in
be here.
trouble.
I was gonna I
Yes.
did I saw a woman in the grocery that said, "Well, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing out of school?" And I'm like, "I quit," you know.
Little girl, you should be
I
in the
did. It was a
classroom.
parent of a former student that said, "What are you doing?" Like,
That is extremely judgmental sounding.
oh, it
What was
was.
she doing
I
out in the
know,
world?
really. Well, what do you I'm shopping and I don't teach, as if I had to answer to her. I mean, isn't
Wow.
that
You'll
funny?
never forget that.
Oh, I will never forget it. It's been over 10 years, but I won't. But
Mm,
that is part of the whole, what another bit of freedom I felt was that I don't have to be there. I don't have to, and I really don't have to answer to you, but I'm gonna just
mm,
because whatever, I'm going to.
mm.
But
With
But
that was
we
crazy.
work weirdly hard for systems we don't even believe in.
Right,
There's
right.
often this kind of
Absolutely.
surprising loyalty where like even if you're rebellious in one area of your life and assertive and bold, it's amazing how we all have authority issues and are
Oh
kind of
yeah.
serving something where when you think it through, you don't even necessarily care.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
absolutely. Yeah, that's the truth.
when
we don't always follow it up.
Yeah.
when people are reading your book, and specifically people of our demographic are reading your book and they're looking at this and saying, how do I figure out which desires I should look for first? Like, if I
Mm.
don't know, what do I tap into first? Control or
Oh, I mean, I would say go to the opposite end. So ask yourself what you're really afraid of, what scares you most, and ask yourself what frustrates you most. I mean, and I'm sure we can all think of either. Like some of us are more anxious, and uh, some of us love to be critical and kind of go to a judgmental place. But whatever works for you negatively, I I'm all about I'm all about being kind of Wednesday Adams about it and going to the dark side straight away. Like, be a raven.
Yeah, I
okay,
love that. Go to what scares you first. I'm sitting here
Yeah.
and
just
work your way back.
writing that. Yes,
Yeah.
and work your way back. Yeah. You know, these other parts in your book, you talk about uh winning and you talk about control. And
Mm,
that is, it's so amazing just in relationships how control and winning can play such a big part in
such a
just
big part.
relation. Yeah,
Unofficially. And it's again often a kind of game that turns out not to be fun. And there's no there. If
yeah,
you kind of follow it up, like what are you trying to win a point about? What's really going to come of it? So with friendships and frenemies especially, there can be this weird kind of competitive rivalrous thing that goes on for decades. I mean, I've had an unofficial game going with someone where the points that we each try to win, I have gotten better, but it's over very small things. It could be who is kind of more honest, who is more connected, whatever it is. Like we have these unofficial contests that don't get acknowledged.
yeah. It's, reading that chapter, I could just see so many similarities in just relationships with friends, family members, in
Mm,
that just like time. Time is such a big thing about being on time and making someone
mm.
wait. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Oh, yes. And the points for judgmentalism as well, like when you do come back together and how someone describes their life, and we we love sizing each other up, and it's not always nice. And I mean, even empathy can be a way of feeling superior. It can be kind of, oh, that poor woman for what she's going through. And there's a Schadenfreude to it. Like there's a little bit of glee.
Yeah.
And I'm not always, but
But just
sometimes.
kind of like, oh, I'm glad my life's not like that,
Oh, like
that type of thing.
there's a chirpiness. I mean, I think when we're really honest with ourselves, we can feel oddly giddy at moments, learning that someone else is really struggling. Not
Yeah.
always. There are virtuous moments, but I,
Yeah.
there are
I
many moments of feeling just a
oh
little
yeah.
bit gleeful.
Oh yeah, I know, and I'm getting, I don't know if she listens or not, but like like
Yeah.
my mother-in-law one time in my granite, it looked like the thing of the granite looked like there was a crack, but it wasn't. It was a pattern in the granite. And she's like, "You have a crack right there." And I'm like, "Oh no, that's not a crack. That's the pattern." Oh, like she was upset that I didn't have a crack in my granite.
Oh my gosh. And she didn't admit that she was wrong either.
And she
They
went,
never do.
"Oh."
I don't think
Oh,
she'll listen to this either because
Oh no,
she'll
we're gonna
listen to
make
some
sure this stays in, and you're
but,
just
but,
mother-in-law.
but that is such a perfect example of it's almost like she wanted there to be something wrong with my
Right.
yeah,
countertop. Yeah.
yeah, she did.
She
Totally.
did.
You were
Yeah.
onto her. But also, and I'm just fully speculating here, but if she doesn't listen to this, it's also a way of having something over you to not be engaged with your world. Like I think that's another way I mean, do you like that I'm doing armchair analysis of your behavior? I think when people refuse to be impressed or curious, it's a way of like punishing and taking points away. And we can try really hard to get the approval of someone who just won't give it to us.
Yeah.
And often it's not the people we think it should be. Like it doesn't necessarily make sense. The people we
Yeah.
want to impress and get validation from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Charlotte, for coming on. We really appreciate it, guys. Make sure to check out the book. Tell Me What You Want. A therapist
I'm
and
gonna
her
hold it up.
clients explore our deepest 12 desires. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You guys are fabulous. It's so nice talking with you.
Thank
You
you.
too.